The first quarter of the year has delivered a major blow to some of the world's most prominent automakers, especially in North America. Amid a global shift toward electric vehicles and away from internal combustion engines, legacy manufacturers are struggling to keep up. Among the hardest hit is Stellantis, the multinational conglomerate that owns American brands like Dodge, Jeep, and more. The company is in visible distress, its sales figures in a dire picture that even internal restructuring and leadership changes have failed to improve. In the US, Stellantis reported a 12% decline in total vehicle deliveries compared to the same period last year, selling just 293,000 across the board. However, the situation in Canada is even more alarming, with a 20% drop. These numbers are especially problematic because Stellantis, already financially strained, can't afford to keep bleeding market share and investor confidence. And nowhere is this fall from grace more apparent than Dodge. Dodge, once a powerhouse in the American auto industry and long celebrated for its gas muscle cars, suffered a monumental collapse in Q1. The brand recorded a decline of nearly 50%, specifically 49.6% year over year. That's an unprecedented fall, one that's closely tied to the retirement of iconic Chargers and Challenger models. These vehicles, the spiritual successors of American muscle car golden age, have sustained Dodge's appeal. In the first quarter of 2024, nearly 20,000 units of these models were sold. In Q1 of 2025, that number collapsed to just around 2,000. Their electric successor, the Daytona EV, despite its modern design and specs, only moved 1,900 units. This indicates a massive failure to transition brand loyalty from traditional V8s to EVs. The problem is much deeper than simple sales. Dodge's core customer base has always been drawn to visceral appeal of roaring engines, elements that are difficult to replicate in electric form. The Daytona EV might be a capable machine, but it hasn't yet captured the same emotional connection with buyers. The rapid retirement of the Charger and Challenger appear to have left a gaping hole in Dodge's product lineup. As a result, the brand is facing an identity crisis during one of the most transformative periods in the auto industry. Dodge's collapse, however, is only one piece of Stellantis' broader problems. Jeep, which has historically been a top performer in the SUV market, also faced significant setbacks. Total Jeep deliveries declined by 10% year over year, with some of its key models showing even steeper loss. The full-size Jeep Wagoneer dropped by 60%, and the more expensive Grand Wagoneer was down by 48%. Even the Wrangler, a symbol of rugged off-road capability, saw decline. These numbers suggest a broader consumer shift away from traditional SUVs that aren't keeping pace with modern expectations. Ram, Stellantis' truck division, has not escaped the turmoil either. Sales fell another 2% in Q1. Much of Ram's struggle can be attributed to growing concerns about reliability and quality. Once considered a top-tier competitor in the US, Ram now finds itself falling behind as rival brands invest heavily in electrification. Consumers are becoming increasingly discerning, and Ram's failure to address perceptions of declining quality is costing it dearly. Chrysler, meanwhile, continues to drift in irrelevance. Its sales remain mostly flat compared to last year. Only 35 units were delivered across the first quarter, a staggeringly low number for a brand that once stood at the forefront of American innovation. Chrysler currently has one of the thinnest lineups in the industry, and many believe it would be better served if separated from Stellantis and placed under new stewardship that could breathe life back into its name. Alfa Romeo, the premium Italian marquee under Stellantis, is also languishing. The brand sold a mere 600 vehicles per month in Q1, translating to a 15% year-over-year drop. Despite its heritage and aesthetic appeal, Alfa Romeo has never managed to gain significant traction in the North American market. Fiat is a rare exception, though its success is mostly symbolic. The brand posted a 240% increase in sales, which at first glance sounds impressive. However, this growth is from a minuscule base. Fiat went from selling roughly 150 cars a month to about 500, a level of volume so low that it's barely worth registering in market analysis. Despite this statistical bump, Fiat remains a fringe player, its relevance in the US market all but extinguished. The situation in Canada mirrors that of the US, if not worse. Stellantis brands took major hits across the board. Dodge fell by 5%, Jeep dropped by a staggering 25%, and Ram saw a 30% decline. These numbers confirm that Stellantis is not just facing isolated problems in one region, it's experiencing systemic failure in multiple markets. Its product strategy appears misaligned with current consumer expectations, its leadership changes have yet to yield results, and dealer networks are growing increasingly concerned. As the Western market stumbles, the Chinese auto industry is racing ahead at full speed, particularly in the electric vehicle segment. In February alone, EV sales in China surged by another jaw-dropping 82% compared to February of the previous year. Even more impressive is that February is typically the weakest month for auto sales in China due to the Lunar New Year holidays. This surge indicates that Chinese consumers are not just warming up to EVs, they're embracing them en masse. Estimates suggest that approximately 60% of all vehicles sold in China during February were new energy vehicles, including fully electric plug-in hybrid and hydrogen-powered cars. However, hydrogen is still largely irrelevant in China as consumers overwhelmingly prefer battery-powered vehicles. This puts the spotlight squarely on BEVs and PHEVs as the dominant forces during the Chinese auto market forward. In total, around 840,000 new energy vehicles were sold in February, shattering expectations. When January's figures are added into the mix, the growth trend becomes even more pronounced. For the first 2 months of the year, NEV sales in China were up by 50% compared to last year. At this pace, some analysts now believe the internal combustion engine could effectively be extinct in the Chinese market in the early next year. Why are Chinese consumers moving so decisively toward EVs? The answer lies in value, performance, and practicality. For roughly the same price as a gas-powered car, buyers can now get an EV with better performance and lower operating costs. There's simply little reason left for buyers to stick with gas unless they're in very specific situations. Leading the charge is BYD, which delivered an incredible 318,000 vehicles globally in February alone. Even more impressively, BYD sales outside of China grew by a whopping 177%. The company is aggressively expanding into Europe and other international markets, even building its third EV factory in Europe to keep up with soaring demand. Meanwhile, other Chinese EV manufacturers are also rapidly rising. Geely's J Auto sold nearly 100,000 units, and the Wuling GM SGMW joint venture managed 57,000. There are also others that posted strong numbers, with all selling tens of thousands of units each. Even Tesla, which once dominated the EV scene in China, is now being challenged. In February, Tesla delivered 30,700 vehicles in China. Meanwhile, XPeng, a rapidly growing domestic competitor, sold 30,400, nearly matching Tesla. XPeng has been breaking its own sales records for 7 straight months, and it's seeing exponential growth over 300% year over year. Other notable players include Li Auto, Leap Motor, GAC Ion, and even Xiaomi, which sold over 20,000 units despite only recently entering the auto market. While what's more telling is that among the top 15 EV brands in China, none are traditional Western automakers, except for General Motors, which only holds a 33% stake in its joint venture with Wuling and SAIC. The rest are either Chinese companies or, in Tesla's case, an international pioneer. The stunning contrast between the collapse of legacy automakers in the West and the meteoric rise of EV brands in China illustrates a major inflection point in the global auto industry. On one hand, companies like Stellantis are struggling to evolve, burdened by outdated manufacturing, internal politics, and customer bases that are no longer loyal. On the other hand, China's EV sector is charging ahead, driven by innovation, favorable government policies, and rapidly shifting consumer attitude. The implications are huge. As Chinese companies continue to innovate and expand globally, and as consumers around the world grow increasingly comfortable with EVs, the gap between progressive and legacy automakers will only widen. Stellantis and others must act fast, not only to stop the bleeding, but to transform fundamentally, because the EV revolution isn't on the horizon, it's already here. And for those who aren't keeping up, the road ahead looks increasingly uncertain.